Jesus said, "For this reason I tell you all, be not anxious about your life, what you all will eat or what you all will drink, or about your body, what you all will wear." And the people replied, "Yeah, right." Amen. Please be seated. So, more than 50 years ago, there was a major league pitcher named Jim Bouton, and he wrote a groundbreaking book called Ball 4. Now, it's one of those books that would not even get noticed today, but back in 1970, it was a huge deal. It was even scandalous because it was one of the first times an athlete had broken what used to be a code of silence of what goes on in a major league clubhouse and gave a real and often kind of unflattering look at baseball and its players. It's a fantastic book. And the best line is the very last line in the book. And it's why I keep this baseball on my desk wherever I am. Looking back over his long career, in the very last line of his book, Jim Bouton says, "You see, you spend a good piece of your life gripping a baseball, and in the end, it turns out that it was the other way around the whole time." Now, I don't know if Jim Bouton knew he was speaking deep theological truth, but he was. Whatever we grip onto most tightly is what has us most tightly in its grip. And so I keep this baseball on my desk, and I pick it up when I need to ask myself, well, what am I gripping onto most tightly here? And sometimes it's my need to be liked. Sometimes it's my need to be right. Sometimes it's my need to be seen as a good rector, or not to commit what was drilled into me as the original sin of hurting anyone, especially someone I care about, which is frankly a great sentiment, but tends to make me too conflict avoidant in a world where we're just bound to hurt each other in the course of everyday life. What is it that I am gripping onto most tightly in this moment, I ask myself, because I can be pretty sure the fear of losing that, I mean, that's why we hold on to things tightly, because we're afraid of losing them. I can be pretty sure that whatever I am gripping onto most tightly is what has me most tightly in its grasp. And that means the more I can loosen my grip, not throw whatever it is away, but just hold it loosely and be okay if it goes away, the freer I am. Now, part of why I need this baseball, plus I got to tell you, there's just something so satisfying about holding a baseball. But part of why I need it is, even though I first read those words in 1987, and even though I have ingested the wisdom of them and even preached on them, I still struggle with it. I struggle with trusting that I am loved even if I am not liked. I struggle with trusting that I am loved even if I am not right, and that sometimes right and wrong is overrated anyway. I struggle with trusting that I am a good rector, not because I create certain results, which is usually the message that's out there for any leader, but that I'm good when I love you by showing you my heart in a way that creates a safe space for us to show each other our hearts, and together seek the healing we all so desperately need. But too often fear to admit that we need even to ourselves. And even though I have worked and continue to work on it, I struggle talking to people about giving money to something that it can be argued that I benefit from personally. More on that in a moment. So in this morning's gospel, Jesus talks about money, which is no surprise because Jesus always talks about money. Jesus talks about money more than he talks about anything else in Scripture. And it's because Jesus knew Jim Bouton. He knows that whatever we hold on to most tightly is what has us most tightly in its grasp. And so when Jesus looks around, what he sees holds people most tightly is money and all their fears surrounding it. And I got to tell you, this is one of those scripture passages we can read and not have to transport ourselves into a first century mindset. We don't have to ask ourselves what demon possession really means or know what an omer is or something like that to relate to this one. Because the more things have changed, the more this one has stayed the same. Jesus says, don't store up wealth. Don't grip so tightly to wealth. Instead, loosen our grip on wealth so we can grab onto those things that bring us true joy, not just an absence of fear. Loosen our grip on wealth so we can grab onto love, so we can grab onto joy, so we can grab onto freedom. Loosen our grip on wealth because our grip on wealth is a fear of loss that will forever have us in its grasp until we let go of it. And that's what it is fear. And it's a well-founded fear in this society because we have ample evidence, 1 million voices a day that tell us that we are on our own. I mean, think about it. The entire insurance industry is a concession to the fact that we cannot be counted on to care for each other and to have others care for us. And we know that, so we hold on to what we have and we build up storehouses of it because we know that it can go away, and everything around us says that if it goes away, we are screwed. In fact, many of us are actually kind of pre-screwed because it's not wealth that has us in its grip, it's debt. Educational debt, consumer debt, healthcare debt, trapped in the rental economy debt. All that debt that comes from living in a society where those basic rights of education, food, clothing, healthcare, and shelter are not guaranteed, or at very least the guarantee is distributed unevenly. Now we hear Jesus say this morning, I always imagine a nice pastoral tone, be not anxious about your life, what you all will eat or drink, about your body and what you will wear. Well, easy to say for you, Jesus. You got a bunch of wealthy women bankrolling you while you travel from town to town with your friends, living off the kindness of strangers. And then, how afraid can you really be of hunger when you got that whole loaves and fishes trick in your bag? And that's not all. Because if we are in a position to store up wealth, we generally raise our standard of living. And while it is easy and feels good to raise our standard of living, it is not only painful to decrease it, but because we start measuring ourselves and our worthiness and lovability by our standard of living, the higher our standard of living, the more we start looking aspirationally toward the next horizon and the next, often in ways that can kill our joy about where we are in the abundance we have. And I'll give you an example. A few months ago, I took a trip with Thistle Farms to Nepal to visit some women's cooperatives in Kathmandu. And the donor who funded the trip wanted us to be at our best and make the best use of our time there, so she paid for business class tickets from LAX to Kathmandu for the group of us. I know, huh? Now, maybe you fly business class all the time, but I don't, and I've never flown it on an international flight. And so I was thrilled and grateful to have that seat that turns into a bed, really good food and free drinks, a TV screen you could probably see from about 30,000 feet. I watched all 3 Creed movies. It was awesome. And right there, most of you are probably thinking, wow, an all-expense-paid trip to Kathmandu must be nice. Yeah, it was amazing, and I'm deeply grateful for it. And it didn't stop 2 things from happening inside me. The first is that one point during my flight, I got up to stretch my legs, and I took a peek into first class. Do you know they have doors that give them their own private cabins? They had an onboard shower spa. I think even their pillows were softer. So here I am flying business class halfway around the world for free, heading to an amazing place for free, and it's great, and I'm enjoying it, and I'm grateful, and a part of me is going, man, but in first class. And it killed just a little bit of my joy, even as I chastised myself for feeling that way, which is kind of dumb because we can't really help our feelings, right? Just express them, learn from them, and love ourselves and each other through them. And that's part of my point. The envy wasn't a bad feeling, and I wasn't a bad person for feeling that way. Whether we were originally wired that way or whether our society has turned us into being this way, at least right now for us, that's just how the gravity pulls us. And it sure wasn't helpful. I needed to loosen my grip on my desire to have the best and more. Because as soon as I got to first class, I would have tuned in some movie on my big screen TV, and there would have been someone in a private jet, and the same thing would happen. And pretty soon you're Jeff Bezos and Elon Musk and your ridiculous rocket ship. Don't hate the player, hate the game. Now, the second thing that happened on my flight back, which, because I had extended my trip and spent an amazing week traveling through India, again, wow, was an economy class trip. Now, I've flown economy class or coach or steerage or whatever you want to call it my whole life. And yet I had never done it after having flown business class over 3 continents. And while again I was still grateful, I was literally flying back from a transformative trip to Nepal and India, having spent 3 days at Gandhi's ashram and immersing myself in his teachings. And by the way, Gandhi made a point of traveling 3rd class everywhere for just these reasons. And part of me was still gripping on to that experience of the flight over, because part of me that whole trip was kind of looking longingly forward towards the front of the plane. Oh, and remembering what that business class seat felt like. We get accustomed, and then we get addicted, and then we want more. And it is a never-ending prison of increasing dissatisfaction at best and misery at worst that drives most of the major crises we are facing. Because frankly, it is the driving force behind the colonialism whose bills are continuing to come due, not just in places like Gaza and Central America and Sub-Saharan Africa, but on a planet that we have seen as a source of extraction rather than a partner in joyful living. We are accustomed and we get addicted, and then we want more. I know it has happened, and it still happens to me. It's why when I was in campus ministry, the advice that I always gave graduating students was keep your overhead, your standard of living, as low as you can handle it, because I just knew that whenever I had been able to do that, I had always been much freer. But even that had always been much more a feeling I had and something I would say than something I absolutely believed. And then one day, about 14 years ago, I got an email from a young woman I had met 10 years before that. To tell you how long it was, we had met sitting together on a super shuttle at the World Trade Center to take us to Newark Airport. And I struck up a conversation with her because she had this really cool t-shirt she had made that said, "My economy went global and all I got was this stupid t-shirt." Anyway, she was in her early 20s at the time, and when she found out I worked with college students, she asked me what advice I would give to her as someone just starting out. And so I told her what I told my college students: keep your overhead as low as you can stand it, because the lower your overhead, the freer you will be. 10 years later, out of the blue, here's the email I got, and I absolutely saved it. "Hi, Reverend Kinman. This might sound very strange, but I think I met you on a bus to Newark Airport about 10 and a half years ago. I'm emailing you because I wanted to thank you very deeply for a piece of advice that you gave me." Like, seriously, be careful what you tell people. Or maybe don't. We were discussing social justice and how to make place for it in modern life, and you told me something very simple that I somehow had the sense to take to heart: keep your overhead low. So here's what that piece of advice has let me do. Travel the world for 6 months. Maintain financial independence. Build a career reporting on poverty and low-wage work. Learn Spanish. Write a book on food and class, out next month from Scribner. By the way, it's a great book called The American Way of Eating. I'm emailing because I was recently asked what was the best piece of advice I had received and how I'd managed to build such an unusual and meaningful career. And I realized that really both answers were rooted in that conversation I'd had on the bus with you. I stayed in a cheap apartment even when my income rose, and was able to withstand changing jobs so I could keep doing work I loved. A cheap apartment meant I could save money to travel, and that finding a subletter was easy and gave me enough perspective to do better work writing about poverty and opportunity here at home, and it meant that I could accept a tiny book advanced to do an amazing project. So basically, thanks. In its own way, that conversation has meant the world to me, and I'm incredibly grateful to have had it with you. Hope all is well with you. Best, Tracy. And there it is. Jesus says, don't store up wealth, store up all the things you cannot buy. Jesus, meet Tracy McMillan. And I know this, the baseball, right? I know this and I still struggle with it. And part of it is because once we get going on this path, it is so hard to stop. U2 wrote a fantastic song called God Part 2. It's a brilliant answer to John Lennon's song, God, where Lennon lists all those things he doesn't believe in. You remember, I don't believe in Beatles, I just believe in me, Yoko and me, and that's reality. Well, Bono gives his own list of things he doesn't believe in, except his list is about how all the things he quote unquote doesn't believe in are things that are actually, most of the time, the guiding values of his life. And my favorite line is when he sings this: don't believe in excess, success is to give. Don't believe in riches, but you should see where I live. I love this line, and it's perfect for this sermon because seriously, you've been to the All Saints Rectory? Nice place. Wealth is not bad. Wealth can do amazing things, and it is a huge trap and our biggest spiritual challenge because it is about who and what owns us if we grasp it tightly instead of holding it loosely. Now, I'm on a Rumi kick recently, and I came across this verse that sums up for me what Jesus is preaching and what Tracy found. Forget safety. Live where you fear to live. Destroy your reputation. Be notorious. Let me say that again. Forget safety. Live where you fear to live. Destroy your reputation. Be notorious. Now, Rumi is describing a life of freedom, which is what I kind of think we all want. And the way we get it is living in such a way that we trust community to provide what we need so we don't have to grasp onto it so tightly ourselves. It's why the earliest followers of Jesus, according to Acts, held all things in common and gave to each other as had need. And that's what I want for me. That's what I want for each of us, and that's certainly what I want for all of us as an All Saints community. I want us to be so free from grasping our wealth that we can feel the absolute joy of giving whenever someone is in need and the absolute freedom of knowing that we don't need to fear because we have a community that will never let us go without. Now, I actually knew a church in Washington, D.C. called the Potter's House who lived this. They asked everyone who was a member to tithe. That's to give 10% of their income to the church. They said, that's your job. You get to keep 90%, give 10%. And if you couldn't pay your rent, the church would pay it for you. If your car broke down and you needed it to get to work and you couldn't afford to fix it, the church would get it fixed for you. If you couldn't afford a medical procedure or insurance or food, the church would pay it for you because they said that's the job of the community, to make sure nobody gets left behind or goes without. I mean, that is some serious Jesus vibe. And talking to people who were a part of that community, they would always talk about it because from the highest to the lowest income, it was one of the things they loved most about the Potter's House, that they knew they were in a community they trusted would never let them go without anything they truly needed. They were joyful because they were freed from the worry, and they were freed to give. They moved their wealth from fear, where it is for way too many of us, to joy. I mean, doesn't that sound amazing? And really, there is nothing stopping All Saints from being a community like that, except for our own fear. The past 2 years, we have stayed afloat financially, and here I need to say what that means is we have maintained the level of staffing and programs that we're used to. We have significant financial issues, and in a world where upwards of 40% of churches are in danger of closing in the next 5 years, we're not in that category, and so we always need to look at our challenges in context and realize that context also invites us to a deeper level of service with communities that have less. But anyway, the past 2 years, we have maintained financially with government COVID assistance that is not going to be available next year. And even after 50 years of absolute prosperity in this church, we basically have little or no endowment for a church our size and millions of dollars of deferred maintenance on our building. So bills are coming due, and we're kind of in a bind. We kind of been grasshoppering instead of anting. And now it's wintertime. Because you see, historically, most years, congregational giving has accounted for 85 to 90% of the All Saints budget, and as people with the greatest income are moving into retirement, and so many younger people who are mired in educational, medical, consumer debt, trapped in the rental economy are coming into this community, the financial picture is getting harder and harder. And yet we still got this. Yes, we are actively working on long-term solutions, building endowment and diversifying income streams, all the business type stuff we need to do, and yet the central challenge is a spiritual challenge of liberation. Because the truth is, if every person in this congregation kept 90% of, I'll even say, their post-tax income and gave 10% to All Saints Church, we would have more money than we knew what to do with. We could guarantee that kind of security that comes from community and frees us from anxiety and get filled with the joy of giving and creating along the way. And that's where my heart is talking about giving. Because I know from my own life, those times that I have been able to do this have been some of the most joyful times in my life. It's why I tithe. And I want that for you, and I want that for us. And now we come back to the trouble I have struggling with talking to people about giving money to something that it can be argued that I benefit from personally, like, say, All Saints Church. Especially because one of the unspoken, and I've got to say increasingly spoken expectations of my job is that I be a really jammin' fundraiser. And that's because I got weird voices in my head that are hardwired to my own insecurities. You see, I have encountered so much cynicism in my life that I have an unfortunate habit of projecting it on others and then preemptively preparing for it. So when I ask you for money for All Saints Church, I struggle with internal fears that you think the only value you have to me and the church is how much you can give, like you're some ATM or something. And frankly, that's how those among us with wealth get treated a lot of the time, so it's not like, a completely irrational fear. And money is power in this society, so sometimes we respond to that by using our money to manipulate and get what we want instead of giving in joy. The gravitational pull of all those things is pretty strong because in most of the world, that's just called doing business. So we're asking you to give to All Saints Church. And because we are facing a truly sizable projected deficit, making up more than $500,000 in COVID funds from 2023, it's easy to have fear be our motivator because, frankly, part of what's happening right now as we confront our financial situation is a lot of fear and anxiety of how we're all going to make this work. And yet, while there is every reason to give in response to that fear, I actually think that is a horrible reason to give. What I really hope we will all do is think about the role wealth has in our lives and the role we want wealth to have in our lives. Is our relationship with the wealth we have more about fear or more about joy? And to the degree that it's about fear, how can we move it over to joy? And that means if you were experiencing any kind of poverty, what a difference would it make to be freed from that burden? Actually, to not be anxious about your life, what all you will eat or what you all will drink, or about your body or what you all will wear. And if you were among those of us who are not experiencing any sort of poverty, what a joy would it be to be part of freeing each other from that. For all of us, whether what has us in our grip is wealth or debt, fear or anxiety, what would it be like to let go of that so we can embrace the God who is love and let that God who is love embrace and provide for us through one another? If every one of us gave 10% of our income, and it took me a couple years to get to that point when I first tried doing this, but if every one of us gave 10% of our income to All Saints Church, we could stop worrying about money as a church. And I got to tell you, I spent a lot of time in meetings worrying about money. And we could spend that time getting on with the joy of loving deeply with the abundance that we share. I hope we'll consider that. I mean, really consider that. And not just dismiss it as, oh, he's talking to somebody else, or, well, there's no way I could do that. There's no way we could do that. Because this is about our liberation. Consider and embrace this kind of giving, not for fear of losing what we have, but for joy of embracing what we can become. Because no matter what wealth we have, I hope together we can learn to hold it loosely and joyfully, so we can hold on to God and each other with the same ferocity of love with which God holds us, because it is what we grip most tightly that will always have us most tightly in its embrace. Amen.